In this tutorial, I'll go over how you can use the different tools we've been using all semester to gather information and organize it for your research paper. So on my screen here, I've opened up the document that we worked on in class, the research paper planning document. And you remember, it's just sort of a rough idea of some questions that we can ask about the conspiracy that we're researching. And for this demonstration, I'm going to use the conspiracy theory that marijuana cures cancer and Big Pharma knows it and is keeping it a secret. So here are some of the questions that I am going to be writing about or answering in my paper. I've got to explain the theory, so I've got to sort of summarize it in a couple hundred words. I've got to talk about how it started, its history. I'm going to talk about who believes it. I'm going to figure out who's the culprit or the bad guy. I'm going to talk about what's happening in society that makes this theory have a life. And finally, I'm going to talk about whether or not the conspiracy has actually influenced our larger society. Notice I've numbered each one of these questions, and that's because when I use the research planning tool, I've added a column to it here. In this column, I'm going to just number which question the note that I've taken answers, and that way I'm going to know where to go and put these notes in the body of my paper. So these are the questions, and this is my research planning sheet that we have that you can use. And now I'm going to go over to this side of the page, and I'm just going to do a search, and I'm going to try to find some information about this theory. So I'm going to put marijuana cures, and I had typed this in already, so marijuana cures cancer, Big Pharma conspiracy. So I get a bunch of sites up right away, and remember that I have to be looking for credibility of my sources. There's three factors, right? There's how current it is, it's whether it's unbiased, and whether or not the source is actually an expert or an authority. So what I'm going to do right away, is I'm going to adjust the settings so that the tools, so that I get rid of anything that is outside of that last 5-year range. So I'm clicking on custom range, and then I'm going to put in 2015 to 2020. So now I'm making sure that the sources that I find are actually within that range of time. Okay. So I can look here and I can see if I find any information that looks like it's going to be from a source that I trust. Next, I'll just start looking, as we talked about, I'm looking for bias. So I'm avoiding the .coms and the .nets, not always, but remember that frequently they are part of commercial enterprises. So I'm going to go ahead and sort of skip that. The .net, I can always come back to it if I don't find something else. I look here and it says mayoclinic.org. And even though .orgs can be biased, remember that I mentioned that when it's associated with a widely held to be credible organization like the Mayo Clinic, it is acceptable to use it. So the Mayo Clinic is widely known across the country. It's considered an expert, an authority. So I'm going to actually go ahead and click on this link and see the article. So right away as I look, I'm just kind of scrolling, and I don't see anything right now in the heading about marijuana. So I'm going to go ahead back up here, and I'm going to actually hold down my F3 key. And you'll notice that gives me a search box up here. And this is a quick way that I can look through a website. I've got the word marijuana typed in. And now I hit enter, and it's going to show me everywhere marijuana appears on this site, and it doesn't, right? So I see 0 out of 0. So I don't know why that came up in my search results, but I'm going to close this search box, and I'm not going to be using this source for now. I'm going to click the back button and go back to my Google search results. So now I'm at this third one, and it's an unfamiliar source, and I get to Forbes. So I know Forbes is a well-known magazine, And what I'm going to, and this is an article from 2018. So now I'm going to go ahead and look at the media bias chart. And I'm going to see if Forbes is listed here. And I do see, look, Forbes is right here in the middle. So it's in the neutral area. And it's also in an area where it uses complex analysis and reporting. So Forbes looks like it's an okay site for me to use. So now I'm going to go back to that source and click on it. I know that it's about marijuana because it says it right in the title. So I'm going to just sort of scan a little bit and see if I see anything that mentions, that looks like this will be something useful to me. So I'm scrolling down and it says the pharmaceutical companies. So it's talking about what the conspiracy is and this idea of big pharma. So it looks like there's a lot of information, discussion, stories claiming the U.S. government, Department of Health finally admits marijuana kills cancer are definitely part of the confusion. Let's see. And now this is some information that it looks like I will end up using. So since I know I'm going to use that information, the very next thing I'm going to do before I go any further is I'm going to start one of these research organizer sheets. And to do that, the very first thing that I will do is I will actually make a Noodle Tools works cited entry. So I already opened Noodle Tools here, and this is a website, as you know. So I'm going to click here, and I'm going to start a new project. And this is going to be, I'm just going to call it conspiracy paper. And remember that we were assigned an MLA paper and we want to use advanced. So I'm going to hit submit. And now I'm going to go to sources because I want to add this source right now so that I can go ahead and use it to take notes and use it for my paper. So I'm clicking on the new source button and it asks me where I found my source. It was a website. And it is a web page. Remember, we mentioned before that even magazines, when they're online, are web pages. So I'll go back over to the article. It wants the URL, and I'll copy, and I'll go back and forth to Noodle Tools and fill in this information. So I'll just pause you guys for a moment while I do this. Okay, so I've gone ahead and created the citation for my source. And if I click up here and export it to Word, it's going to open up in Word for me. And I can just copy this. All right, I just Control-C, or I can just go copy, close this. And now up here, I'm going to add the works cited entry. So I'm going to paste it just like that. And now I'm going to go back over to Noodle Tools, and I'm going to look at this options button, and I'm going to look for what the in-text citation will say, and it shows me that I'm just going to be using atoms here in parentheses. Okay, so now that I've done that, I don't need Noodle Tools anymore because for now I'm done with this. I've just got this one source. So I'm going to move this over, and this is my in-text citation, and so I have it noted here so that as I'm working in my paper, I can just cut and paste this as I need to. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in here a little bit more. All right, so now I'm basically ready, and if I do some direct quotes right here, I know that I'm going to be doing atoms, just like I said, so it's just as easy for me right now to type a couple of these in. Atoms, and I can do that. And I know also that so I just like to get these things ready before I get started. And I also know, same thing here, I'm just going to, even though it's a paraphrase, it's going to use atoms, and the period's going to come after. So I can sort of just be ready for when I'm taking my notes. All right, so now I'm going to begin going through the article. And remember, I'm also going to be looking at these questions, and I'm going to remind myself of them. What is the theory? How did the theory start? Who follows the theory? Who's the culprit of the theory? Who's behind it? And what are the, who do the theorists blame? And what are the influences in our society that is sort of stoking the theory, and then how has it impacted our greater society? So those are my questions. I'll start reading, and I'm just going to pause for a minute until I come across a quote that I think will be good for to use as an example. Okay, so I've found a quote right here that I think would be useful. It just talks about how much the American healthcare industry is and why people sort of have this notion that Big Pharma would be against curing cancer. So I'm copying this, and I'm going to bring it over here. And this is the word for word copy, right? I'm not even trying to paraphrase, so I'm just going to paste it in here. And here it is. And then notice that at the end, I've got the... I've already got my citation already. My in-text citation is ready. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put this note into my own words to make sure that I understand it. So, and I'm getting out of this the point that I want to make. So what I want to be saying here is that cancer drugs, chemo treatments, etc., are part of the $3 trillion healthcare industry. And Big Pharma, people who believe the theory believe that Big Pharma wants to sell treatments because the cure would cost them money. So I'm just going to pause for a moment while I put this into my own words. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken this information, and then I've sort of culled out what I need for my paper. This piece, that conspiracy theorists believe that the pharmaceutical industry profits from selling chemotherapy and cancer drugs. So they are concealing the knowledge that marijuana cures cancer so they don't lose profits. So that's the information that I want to be able to use in my paper. So now I'm going to go ahead and make a connection to this. And this is going to be how I think about this as both how I can work this into my paper and how this information is useful or ties to ideas that I already have. So I'll just pause again while I fill this in. Okay, so now I've gone ahead and made this paraphrase, and I've filled in a response here. So I've talked about the sort of sense I've made of this quote. Conspiracy theorists often question the motives of industries and assume that they care more about profits than people. They also often believe that these industries have the power to suppress information. So that's one of the things that a couple ideas I was thinking about when I read this paraphrase. And how this connects to my overall paper is this really is talking about the motive for the conspiracy. And now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to look at my research questions, and I'm going to make a note in this column about which research questions this particular quote and paraphrase addresses. So what is the theory? How did it start? Who follows? Who's the culprit? So for me, this actually gets into that notion of who's the culprit. The culprit is the pharmaceutical industry. They're the untrustworthy bad guys. So I think that I can use this question here in I can use this, this quote or paraphrase to answer my question 5. So I'm going to go ahead and put that there. And then I'll just go ahead and repeat this process. I'll keep reading the article, and I'll look for more information that I can use that will be able to support my claim. For example, here's some information where the person is disproving something before, and that came in that was mentioned in the article, and I might actually be able to take a note and use that in this part of my my research paper as well, about how the theory gets disproved. So even though I have not yet written out those questions, it's fine for me to go ahead and actually begin talking about the different kinds of evidence that we come across. And so that is how you're going to use these tools that we've been using all along in order to start creating the research paper. And what you want to do is you want to keep looking. So you want to find your sources, and you want to start taking notes from each of them and fill out one of those one of the reading organizers. And then you'll have a list of quotes and ideas that you can incorporate into your paper.